This one tried college, didn't stick. That's the first thing my dad said about me that night. Not, "This is my daughter," not, "She's doing well." Just that, in front of 30 of his business partners, their wives, and every polished, laughing face at that long mahogany table. I remember my hand tightening around the stem of my wine glass so hard I thought it might snap. Everyone laughed, that polite kind of laughter people do when they don't know if it's safe to laugh. And I just smiled, pretending it didn't sting. The room was too perfect for what was happening. Downtown Houston, top floor of the Petroleum Club, soft jazz playing, chandeliers so bright the silverware looked like it was glowing. Waiters in white gloves glided between tables with bottles of Cabernet. And there I was, seated near the end, next to the waitstaff section, like they didn't know where else to put me. My sister Lauren sat right beside Dad. She looked like she belonged there. Tailored navy suit, MBA from Rice, confident smile. Every time she spoke, Dad's partners leaned in like she was giving a TED talk. "She's the future of the company," Dad said, beaming. Everyone toasted. Then his eyes landed on me. And that's when he said it again, this time louder, clearer. "This one tried college. Didn't stick." He even chuckled afterward, as if it were a harmless joke. I could feel the blood rush to my face. I laughed too, softly, like I was in on it. But inside, something cracked. One of his colleagues, an older man with a thick Texas drawl, leaned forward and asked, "So what are you up to these days, sweetheart?" I opened my mouth, ready to tell him about the small e-commerce project I'd been working on, but Dad didn't even let me finish. "Some Etsy business or something," he said, waving his hand like he was swatting a fly. I froze. "It's actually e-commerce," I whispered, but no one heard me. Or maybe they did and just chose to ignore it. Lauren giggled behind her glass of champagne. The man nodded politely, then turned back to my dad to talk about oil futures. And just like that, I disappeared from the table. I stared down at my plate, at the tiny steak I'd barely touched. They all clinked glasses. No one noticed I didn't raise mine. I wanted to leave. I wanted to stand up, throw the linen napkin in his face, and walk out of that perfect room with its perfect people and perfect laughter. But I stayed. I stayed because leaving would have made me look weak, and I was tired of looking weak in his eyes. "I'll stay till dessert," I whispered under my breath, "just to prove I can." So I sat there through the salad, through the steak, through the endless talk about mergers and oil prices. I laughed when others laughed, nodded when someone said something clever. But the whole time I felt like I was underwater, sounds muffled, chest tight, smile heavy. When the dessert came, I pushed the crème brûlée around with my spoon, trying not to look as out of place as I felt. That's when I heard it, faintly, but enough. Dad was speaking to one of his partners beside him, a man in a gray suit who'd been bragging about his son at Harvard. Dad laughed, leaned in, and said, "I just hope she finds something real to do." Something real. As if everything I'd ever tried, every late night, every small effort, was fake. My hands went cold. My ears buzzed. I stared at the tablecloth, tracing the embroidered lines with my finger so I wouldn't cry. I wanted to say something, anything, but my mouth wouldn't move. I looked at Lauren. She'd heard him too. Her smile faltered for half a second, then she looked away. That hurt more than the words, because it meant she agreed, or worse, she didn't care. The laughter around me blurred. The piano sounded distant, like it was playing from another room. I heard forks clinking, people chatting about weekend golf trips, but it all faded under that one sentence replaying in my head. I just hope she finds something real to do. When the plates were cleared, Dad stood and thanked everyone for coming. I clapped with everyone else. He didn't look at me once. As people began to leave, I stayed seated, pretending to check my phone. My reflection stared back at me from the wine glass. Red eyes, smudged lipstick, fake smile. I didn't even recognize her. I waited until they were gone, until even the waiters were folding napkins and the chandeliers dimmed. Then I
Still running that little online thing? How's your pyramid scheme doing? That's how my dad greeted me that morning.
Not hello, not good to see you, honey. Just that. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the kitchen, sunlight spilling through the tall windows like gold paint. Mom had set the table perfectly, as she always did. Polished silverware, crisp napkins, a vase of white lilies in the middle. Classical music played softly from the speakers, the kind of music that made you feel like you weren't allowed to raise your voice. I sat across from him at the long oak breakfast table, hands folded in my lap, pretending his tone didn't sting. Lauren sat at the kitchen bar, hair curled, scrolling through her phone with a perfect little smirk. She looked comfortable. I felt like a guest. "Good morning, Dad," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Morning." Then, with that dry laugh, "So? Made your first million selling lotion yet?" "It's skincare, actually," I said softly. "I'm building a brand with 2 friends." He looked up at me then, just long enough to raise an eyebrow. "Oh, so not a real job then?" Lauren laughed, loudly, like it was the funniest thing she'd heard all week. I forced a smile. My hands were damp, but I reached for my coffee anyway, just to have something to hold. The porcelain cup felt heavier than it should have. Mom came in from the kitchen with a tray of pancakes. "Let's all just eat before it gets cold," she said, voice tight. I could tell she was trying to keep the peace. She always did. But peace never lasted long in that house. Dad folded the paper and leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on me. "You know," he said, "you could have been something if you'd stuck to school." I froze, butter knife in hand. The sound of the music and the ticking wall clock filled the silence between us. "I'm doing something," I said finally. He chuckled. "Sure you are. Every girl with Wi-Fi thinks she's an entrepreneur now." Lauren snorted into her coffee. "Maybe," he added, "you should just marry someone with a paycheck. Save yourself the trouble." My chest tightened. I didn't look up. I focused on buttering the same piece of toast until it started to tear. The knife scraped against the plate. Quiet, controlled. Mom sighed. "Honey." "What?" Dad said. "I'm just being honest." Mom's hand touched my shoulder gently. "He doesn't mean it," she whispered. I nodded, but my throat burned. Of course he meant it. He always meant it. I kept my eyes on my plate while he stood up, straightened his tie, and said, "Don't waste your potential anymore, sweetheart." Sweetheart? He said it like an insult. He left the table, his leather shoes clicking against the tile, and disappeared into his office down the hall. The sound of that door closing felt like the end of something. Lauren scrolled through her phone again, pretending none of it happened. Mom started collecting plates, humming along to the music, that soft, nervous humming she did whenever she wanted to erase a moment. I sat there, alone at that long table, surrounded by everything that was supposed to feel like home. The sunlight through the window suddenly felt too bright. My reflection in the silver pitcher looked unfamiliar, pale, small, almost invisible. It wasn't just what he said. It was what he meant. That I wasn't enough. That nothing I built would ever be worth his attention unless it came with a degree, or an office, or a paycheck big enough to brag about. I looked down at my plate. Half a pancake, cold coffee, and a smear of butter that looked like it had given up. It felt symbolic. I stood slowly, wiped my mouth with the napkin, and whispered, "Thanks for breakfast." No one looked up. The only sound was the faint scrape of Lauren's fork and the music continuing as if nothing had happened. I walked to the door, grabbed my bag, and stepped out into the Texas sun. The air hit me like heat and freedom at the same time. The sky was painfully clear, that kind of blue that makes you think about everything you've lost and everything you still could have. As I stood on the porch, I realized something. That wasn't my home anymore. Not really. I was just someone they tolerated between meals. Dad's words replayed in my mind. You could have been something if you'd stuck to school. The more I thought about it, the smaller they sounded, the smaller he sounded. I got in my car, shut the door, and just sat there for a while, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding in my ears. I didn't cry, not yet. I just stared at the mansion behind. I don't belong in that house anymore. And for the first time, the words didn't hurt. They felt right. They felt like a beginning. That night, his words played in my head until I couldn't stand it anymore. And when the sun rose the next morning, I was already pulling boxes from my closet. I left with 2 suitcases, a laptop, and no one checking if I made it there alive. That's how it started. No goodbye hugs, no text later asking if I got there safe. Just me, driving 3 hours from Houston to Austin with everything I owned rattling in the back seat. My new apartment wasn't really an apartment. It was a box with thin walls, 1 window, and a mattress on the floor. $900 a month for freedom that smelled faintly of dust and ramen. The air conditioner rattled all night like it was gasping for air. Outside, I could hear the traffic from Interstate 35 and someone's TV next door. But it was mine. For the first time, the silence in the room belonged to me. I set my laptop on a cardboard box and called it a desk. My chair was a crate from the grocery store. The Wi-Fi barely worked, but I stayed up anyway, typing out product descriptions, designing logos, trying to make something, anything that felt real. I lived on ramen and instant coffee. My hands shook sometimes from caffeine. My eyes burned from staring at the screen too long. I didn't have a plan. I just had stubbornness. After a week of trial and error, my website finally went live. 10 orders, then 20. I packed each one by hand, labeling them with shaky handwriting and praying the customers wouldn't hate it. One woman left a 5-star review that said, "Smells amazing. Will buy again." I read it 5 times before going to bed that night, smiling in the dark. It felt like maybe the world wasn't done with me yet. But good things don't last long when you're broke and trying to prove something. My supplier ghosted me right before a shipment. A dozen customers canceled their orders. My credit card maxed out. The landlord taped a warning note on my door about late rent. I stared at that paper for a long time. It looked too familiar. Another reminder that I was failing, just like he said I would. One night, I opened my bank app. The number glowed back at me. $84.36. I wiped my face, opened my laptop, and stared at the glowing screen. It was the only light in the room, cold and blue, but alive. I edited my website, changed the tagline under the logo, from natural skincare handcrafted with love to real skin, real people. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I whispered, "They'll remember my name." From then on, I worked like I was on fire. I took freelance jobs designing websites to pay the bills. I'd sleep 4 hours, wake up, and check orders before dawn. I kept a spreadsheet taped to the wall, marking every dollar in red ink. My friends stopped calling. They moved on to real jobs and real apartments. I stayed, because quitting would make him right. Somehow the orders started coming back. A few at first, then a few more. I didn't celebrate. I didn't trust it yet. I just kept going. Then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed. A notification. At Bella Skin tagged you in a video. I clicked it. A beauty influencer, someone with hundreds of thousands of followers, was holding my product. My product. She said it helped her with acne scars. She smiled, said my brand's name clearly. My inbox exploded. Emails, orders, messages, 100 in one day, maybe more. I didn't even know how to keep up. I sat in the middle of that little apartment, surrounded by boxes and packing tape. My hands were covered in shipping labels. My hair was a mess. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe, and I started laughing, then crying, then laughing again. It wasn't much. It wasn't stability, but it was real. For the first time, I didn't feel like a failure. While my family probably sat around their perfect dining table, eating their perfect brunches, I was here, in a messy apartment, eating cold noodles between shipments, and it finally felt like living. No one was watching, no one was clapping, but it didn't matter. I was building something out of nothing. As I taped the last box shut, my phone buzzed again. Another order, then another. I looked at the glowing screen and whispered through a tired smile, "Maybe this is where it starts." "Still doing that online thing?" Bless her heart. That's what my father said.
As soon as I walked in, I felt the stares, the subtle once-overs, the whispering. I smiled anyway, the kind of smile that hurts your jaw. I kept reminding myself, I belong here, at least for tonight. Lauren stood in the center of the ballroom, radiant in white and gold. She was glowing, perfect, the kind of perfection that photographs well. My father stood beside her, beaming with pride, one hand on her shoulder, the other holding a glass of champagne. It looked like a painting, the perfect Southern family. Except for me, standing at the edges, like a smudge someone forgot to erase. I sipped my drink, pretending not to notice the circle forming around them. Business partners, family friends, old men with heavy rings and fake laughs. They were already talking about mergers, investments, plans for the future. Lauren was the future. I was the past they'd rather forget. Someone turned toward Dad and asked, "And what about your other daughter?" He didn't miss a beat. "Still trying to make that online thing work." Laughter. Soft, polite, painful. I nodded, smiled faintly. "Yes, still trying," I said under my breath. But no one heard me. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. My cheeks burned, my palms were sweating against the glass. I wanted to disappear into the carpet. In that moment, I remembered the dinner 2 years ago. The long mahogany table, the same laughter, the same tone in his voice when he said, "Didn't stick." It was the same script, just a different stage. But this time, I didn't walk away. I stood there, spine straight, eyes dry, pretending the champagne didn't taste like humiliation. Later, as the jazz band played and people drifted toward the dance floor, I watched Lauren and her fiancé dance their perfect dance. She looked at him like he was her crown. My father clapped proudly. The groom's father, a man in a gray suit with a gold watch, stood beside him, talking business. That's when I realized this wasn't just a wedding. It was a deal, a merger between families, sealed with champagne and fake smiles. I was just an unwanted footnote in the contract. After the toast, my father found me, standing near the balcony. His smile faded the moment he saw me. "Try not to embarrass us this time." I smiled at people, hugged relatives, said congratulations like a robot. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. The more I smiled, the emptier I felt. It was like every chandelier was watching me, not out of admiration, but pity. At one point, a waitress passed by with a tray and whispered, "Your dress is lovely." I almost cried, not because of the compliment, but because it was the only genuine kindness anyone had shown me all night. Someone saw me, not as a disappointment, not as a failure, but as a person. I nodded at her, my voice cracking when I said, "Thank you." I turned back toward the dance floor. Lauren was spinning under the lights, her diamond ring catching every reflection in the room. My father laughed beside her, proud and satisfied. And for the first time, I didn't envy her. I just pitied them both. They had everything, money, reputation, status, but not freedom. Everything they did was for show. And suddenly, being broke felt better than being owned. I stood there, watching her twirl, and something inside me shifted. The anger didn't burn anymore. It cooled into something sharper, a quiet certainty. I didn't need their approval to exist. When the music slowed, I slipped out the back doors and walked toward the parking lot. The night air was cold and honest. My heels clicked against the pavement, too loud for how small I felt. Halfway to my car, I stopped, took off my shoes, and let my bare feet touch the ground. The pavement was cool, grounding, real. For the first time that night, I could breathe. I pulled out my phone, opened Instagram, and scrolled through my family's photos. The smiling faces, the gold lights, the captions about family love. I blocked every single one of them, not out of hate, but out of peace. I sat in my car for a long time, watching the building in the distance, the chandeliers flickering through the windows, laughter echoing faintly. Then I drove home, still barefoot, still in that black dress. When I finally lay down that night, I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling, exhausted, hollow, but strangely free. And before I fell asleep, I whispered to the dark, "If I ever rise again, they won't see it coming."
2 years ago, I was sleeping on the floor, eating cold ramen, and
my logo, the one I designed at 2 a.m. after crying over a failed order, now shines on every box we send out. Sometimes I catch myself staring at it and smiling. Not because it's perfect, but because it's mine. I walk between rows of stacked packages, my sneakers squeaking on the concrete floor. My employees wave and smile, people who believe in something I built from scratch. Every order feels like a small redemption, proof that I wasn't the joke they made me out to be. At night, when the noise dies down and everyone's gone, I sit at my desk with a cup of cold coffee and open my email. The numbers don't scare me anymore. I can pay every bill, every invoice, every salary. For the first time, my heart doesn't race when I check my balance. It just beats steady. That's what peace feels like, I think. Not applause, just quiet. Then one morning I opened my inbox and froze. Subject line, feature request, Austin Business Weekly. When the article came out, the headline made my stomach twist. Texas's skincare queen, from apartment startup to million-dollar brand. My picture filled the page, white button-down, hair tied up, shelves of products behind me. I wasn't wearing designer clothes or makeup, just a plain smile, but it was real. I read that article 5 times. Each line felt like a warm hand pressing gently on old bruises. Self-made, resilient, visionary. Words I used to dream anyone would say about me. I wanted to send it to my parents just to show them, but I didn't. I knew silence would say more. A week later, I saw my father's company name in the headlines. Houston oil firm faces layoffs amid market downturn. Executives restructure to stay afloat. I stared at the screen, that familiar logo from my childhood staring back at me. It didn't feel like revenge. It just felt inevitable. Maybe that's how life balances itself, quietly, without asking permission. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post. I just closed my laptop and went back to work. Then one morning my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Proud of you, sweetie. Don't tell your dad I said that." I stared at it for a long time, smiled, then felt my throat close. Even her love had to be. When I walked onto the stage to accept the award for Best Female-Owned Startup in Texas, I smiled for the cameras, held the trophy, thanked my team. The crowd applauded, lights flashed, people cheered. But all I could hear in my head was my dad's voice from that dinner years ago. Some Etsy thing. The lights were too bright, too hot. For a moment, I wished I could step off that stage and go back to the girl who just wanted her father to look at her and say, "I see you." Instead, I smiled wider, because now the whole room did. A few weeks later, I was in my office late again, finishing payroll, when an email arrived. Subject: Investment opportunity, partnership inquiry. Sender: Henderson Oil Group. I blinked, read it again. Henderson, my father's company. My lips parted, but no sound came out. They wanted to invest in my brand. They didn't know who I was behind it, not yet. They just saw numbers, growth, influence, the very things he once mocked me for. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the email. No anger, no smugness, just a deep, heavy calm. After a long silence, I whispered, "He's finally coming to me." I let the words sit in the air like a quiet confession. I printed the proposal, laid it flat on my desk, and signed the preliminary agreement. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from understanding what this moment meant. For the first time, I didn't need his approval. I had his attention, even if he didn't know it yet. I set the pen down and said softly, almost to myself, "Guess who's negotiating now, Dad?" The warehouse was dark except for the blue light of my computer screen. Boxes lined the walls, each one carrying the name I built from nothing, the name he once laughed at. Outside, the Texas sun was setting, turning the sky orange and gold. I looked out the window, hands resting on the desk, and breathed. He once told me to do something real. I finally did. When his company's stock crashed, I didn't smile. I just checked my watch, like I'd been waiting for it.
It started showing up everywhere. Headlines, news tickers, podcasts. Henderson Oil faces legal pressure. Layoffs hit the Houston branch. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt balanced. A few days later, my phone rang. It was my attorney, Michael. "There's an acquisition group forming to buy out Henderson Oil," he said. "They're desperate for liquidity. You might want in." I didn't speak for a few seconds. Then I said quietly, "Send me the file." He hesitated. "You know who that is, right?" "I do." When I opened the email, the company logo filled my screen. The same logo that used to sit on our family's letterhead, printed on his golf shirts, engraved on his whiskey glasses. It used to mean power. Now it looked like a relic. I spent that night in my office, lights off, city sounds leaking through the windows. The only glow came from the screen. His empire laid out in financial decay, debt, unpaid vendors, collapsing partnerships. My father's voice echoed in my head. "I just hope she finds something real to do." I laughed under my breath. "Something real," I whispered. "All right, Dad." By morning, I called Michael. "Buy them," I said. The process wasn't glamorous. It was signatures, negotiations, and silence. I set up an anonymous LLC, no trace of my name, no public link. I wanted this clean, quiet, strategic. The stock was bleeding. Shareholders were panicking. They sold their stakes cheap, desperate to save themselves. Piece by piece, I collected what used to be untouchable. Michael came into my office one night, stack of documents in hand. "You're about to own your father's company," he said. I met his eyes. "He taught me to do something real," I replied. When the final signature hit the page, the deal was done. Henderson Oil, his empire, his pride, his entire identity, now belonged to me. I set the pen down and looked at the morning sunlight creeping through the blinds. It hit the logo on the folder, my skincare company's name printed right above his. One had replaced the other. My chest rose slowly, but I didn't feel victory, not even joy, just stillness. The same kind of stillness that comes after a storm finally runs out of thunder. I thought I'd feel triumphant. Instead, I just felt quiet. Maybe because I didn't win by destroying him. I won by That night, I stayed in my office long after everyone left. The warehouse was dark, silent, except for the hum of the lights. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that once trembled holding a cheap wine glass at his dinner table. Now, they held contracts with his signature below mine. I whispered to no one, "Justice doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it signs papers at midnight." It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. I walked around my office, passing stacks of skincare boxes, shelves lined with the product he once mocked. He said, "Don't waste your potential." I smiled softly. "I didn't waste it," I murmured. "I invested it." The following afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. Subject: Reservation confirmed. Henderson Oil Investor Dinner. Time, 7 p.m. Location, private dining room, the Houston Club. I read it slowly, every word heavy with symmetry. My heart didn't race, it just thudded once, low and calm. For years I wanted to be seen, to be heard. Now I wanted neither. I closed my laptop, stood up, and took one last look around my office, the tangible proof of everything they said I'd never do. Then, under my breath, I said, "Tomorrow night he'll see me, and he won't even recognize me. Yet." And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small when I said it. I felt inevitable. The boardroom smelled like old money and fear, and for once, neither belonged to me. Morning light sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the glass tower, hitting the polished mahogany table like a blade. Leather chairs lined the room. Men in tailored suits whispered behind their coffee cups, voices low and uncertain. Silver carafes gleamed untouched. The company logo, Henderson Oil, hung on the wall, gold letters faded with pride. I sat at the far end of the table. My folder was open, my hands steady. Nobody knew who I was. They saw a new investor, young, quiet, dressed in a black suit that didn't scream for attention. Not the daughter who once sat in silence at the edge of their dinners. Not the girl who was told she'd never make it doing that online thing. Just another seat filled in a room full of men who were afraid of losing everything. And for the first time, I wasn't one of them. I listened. He started talking right away, that confident tone I'd grown up hearing across every dinner table. "Gentlemen, I know it's been a challenging quarter, but restructuring is underway. We're securing new partnerships, new capital, and we'll—" He flipped through his slides, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly. I leaned back, listening. The words were empty, a man trying to convince everyone that the fire he started wasn't burning him alive. Then one of the older board members cleared his throat. "Before we continue," he said, his voice cutting through the room, "we'd like to welcome our new majority shareholder." The air shifted. My father looked up, forcing a chuckle. "Oh?" he said, trying to sound amused. "And who's the lucky one this time?" I could hear my own heartbeat. 1, 2, 3 steady thuds against my ribs. I pushed my chair back slowly. The legs scraped the floor, quiet but sharp. Every conversation stopped. I stood. My father's eyes moved toward me, casual at first, then confused, then wide with disbelief. "Hi, Dad," I said. The room went silent. He froze, like time itself stopped moving. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His colleagues looked between us, realization dawning, confusion deepening. One of them whispered under his breath, "Wait, she's the new owner?" I didn't answer. I just smiled, small and steady. My father blinked hard, shaking his head. "What have you done?" he asked quietly. I looked right at him, holding his gaze. "Exactly what you told me to," I said. "Something real." The words landed heavy, the kind of silence that follows truth, not drama. For a second, even the city outside seemed to pause. He sat down slowly, shoulders sinking, eyes falling to the table. His fingers twisted together, searching for something to hold on to. Control, pride, maybe just oxygen. I stayed standing. There was no joy in it, no thrill, just peace. Quiet, unsettling peace. The kind that feels almost like grief. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but the illusion of him, the giant shadow he cast over my life, had finally disappeared. I wasn't the decoration anymore. I was the one who owned the room. My mind drifted for a moment, back to the clinking glasses and forced smiles of that dinner years ago, back to the echo of his voice. This one tried college, didn't stick. And here I was, sitting at the same level, breathing the same air, but everything was different. When the meeting ended, everyone stood up. Chairs shuffled, papers gathered, handshakes exchanged. My father stayed seated, staring at the table like it had betrayed him. I walked over, stopping behind his chair. He didn't turn. I rested my hand lightly on the back of it and said, "It's just business." Then I walked away. The sound of my heels against the marble floor echoed in the silence he left behind, louder than any applause, sharper than any revenge. And as I reached the door, I realized the quiet that followed me wasn't emptiness. It was closure. A week after I became his boss, my father showed up at my office, looking like a man who finally met the consequences of his own pride. The air inside my Austin headquarters felt still that morning. The sun poured through the glass walls, lighting the white walls and the clean, minimal space I'd built from nothing. My company logo, simple black letters against ivory paint, gleamed behind my desk. The hum of printers, the soft tapping of keyboards, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Everything about it was calm, precise, and under control. I was signing contracts when I heard a knock. 3 slow taps, uncertain, almost polite. When I looked up, he stood there in the doorway. My father. He was smaller than I remembered. His suit hung loose, the fabric wrinkled from the long drive. His hair had gone grayer. The briefcase he carried looked older than I was. For a second, I didn't say anything. I just let the moment sit, like an echo of all the ones he'd stolen from me. "Guess I work for you now,"
he said with a weak chuckle. The words were meant to sound casual, but they broke somewhere in the middle. I gestured to the chair across from me. Sit. He obeyed, his eyes scanning the room, maybe looking for something familiar, but there wasn't anything here that belonged to him. I realized in that moment how many times I had felt small and
"Just business," I said. He forced a smile, the same one he used to wear when belittling me in front of others. "Of course." He picked up the pen and signed. The sound of the pen against paper was quiet, but to me it was thunder. A full circle closing. I stared at his signature, the same one that had once paid my tuition, written checks for my allowance, and signed the rejection letter when I asked to intern at his company. Now it lay beneath mine, beneath my approval. He pushed the papers back toward me. His hands shook slightly. "You built all this," he murmured, almost to himself. I didn't respond, because I didn't build it for him to see. I built it so I'd never have to hear him again. When he left my office, the silence stayed behind like a ghost. I stared at the papers for a while, my chest tight. I'd imagined this moment 100 times, him walking in, realizing who I'd become, seeing the empire I built from the ruins of his doubt. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt heavy, quiet, final. There was no satisfaction, no adrenaline, just exhaustion, like I'd finally reached the top of a mountain and found no air left to breathe. Maybe that's what growing up really is, realizing revenge doesn't heal the wound, it just stops it from bleeding. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. Lauren. Her voice cracked before she even finished the first sentence. "Don't ruin the family, please. You've already taken enough." I held the phone against my ear, eyes fixed on the window, watching the sunlight reflect off the buildings across the street. "I didn't ruin it, Lauren," I said quietly. "I just stopped pretending it was whole." Silence. Then the call ended. I didn't feel angry, just detached, like all the emotions had burned out long before the flames went out. By evening, my assistant walked in with a stack of payroll approvals, the routine part of running a business: signatures, checks, verification. She left them on my desk. I flipped through them absent-mindedly. Then I saw it. Henderson, Charles. His name. On my payroll. My father on my payroll. I sat still for a long moment, the pen in my hand suddenly feeling heavier than it should. Not because I hesitated. Maybe she'd whisper, "You did it." Maybe she'd just smile and stay silent, because she'd know that silence is the real victory. I put the pen down and whispered to myself, "He works for me now." Not as a boast, just a truth. My hand trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from release. It's strange how even closure can make you shake. When the day ended, I turned off the lights and headed for the door. The office dimmed, glowing softly with the last light of sunset. Behind me, the signed contract sat neatly on my desk. One page held his name, the other mine. As I reached for the door handle, I heard his voice behind me, soft, almost broken. "Do you still hate me?" I stopped. For a second, I thought about turning around, but I didn't, because the truth was, I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't feel anything at all. The silence said everything. The restaurant hadn't changed. Same chandeliers, same piano, same table where I learned what humiliation feels like in public. Even the air smelled the same: wine, old money, and quiet judgment. It was strange how a place could stay frozen while you become someone else entirely. I sat at the same table where, years ago, I'd been pushed to the far end, a nobody among executives in suits. Back then, my hands had trembled around a wine glass I couldn't afford to replace if it broke. Now, they rested steady on white linen, painted nails glinting beneath crystal light. A waiter refilled my glass. I nodded, thanked him softly. The piano in the corner played the same gentle tune as that night. Everything looked the same, except me. He walked in exactly 10 minutes late. Old habits. His posture had changed, straighter but tired, the kind of tired that didn't come from work but from time. The staff greeted him politely, none recognizing who he used to be. He used to own this room. His voice, his laughter, his arrogance used to fill it. Now he just blended in. When his eyes found me, he stopped mid-step. For a second, he looked like he wanted to turn back, but pride is a leash, and it pulled him forward. "You look different," he said. I smiled, not mockingly, just calmly. "I am." He sat down, ordered his usual drink. Bourbon, neat. The silence stretched until he started talking about meaningless things: the city traffic, the weather, the state of the economy. I let him talk. Every few sentences he'd glance at me, as if hoping to find a familiar version of his daughter buried under the woman in front of him. He wouldn't. She was gone. Between his words, I heard echoes from the past. "Didn't stick. Some Etsy thing. Hope she finds something real to do." Back then, those words had gutted me. Now they just floated, empty, powerless. He cleared his throat. "The company. It's holding steady now. The board seems confident about the new structure I looked up." "You called me a failure," I said. The room stilled. He blinked, hands tightening around his glass. He didn't speak for several seconds. Then, quietly, "I did." There was no excuse, no defense, just 3 words that arrived 10 years too late. I exhaled, slow. "I bought your company," I said, "and your silence." He looked up sharply, the same eyes that once told me I wasn't enough, now wide with something he'd never shown before: shock, loss, realization. For a second, I saw the flicker of understanding cross his face, that the empire he built, the pride he wore, had ended in my hands, the same hands he once called too soft for real work. Time stopped for both of us. The waiter appeared again, pouring more wine. My glass filled easily. His hand trembled slightly when he lifted his. "Thank you," I told the waiter. My voice was calm, steady, exactly the opposite of how it had sounded in this same room years ago. When the waiter left, he finally spoke. "You proved me wrong," he whispered. I smiled softly, not with pride, not with spite, just truth. "I didn't do it for you." His eyes dropped to the tablecloth. I saw the faintest nod, an admission of defeat, of understanding, of something closer to regret than I ever thought I'd see. We sat in silence. For once, it wasn't suffocating. I studied him, the lines around his mouth, the heaviness in his shoulders. He looked smaller than I remembered, not just older, smaller. For years, I wanted to destroy him. I turned to leave. Each click of my heels on the marble floor echoed like punctuation, not of victory, but of closure. I didn't need to turn around to feel his gaze on my back. For once, it wasn't full of disappointment or control. It was the look of a man realizing too late that he had raised the person who would one day surpass him. Outside, the Houston air was warm and soft, carrying the faint scent of rain. I breathed it in, deeply. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of proving anything. No anger, no pride, just peace. No one tells you that healing feels like emptiness at first, like the silence after a long, cruel song finally ends. I turned back once. Through the restaurant window, I saw him still sitting there, hands clasped, glass untouched, head bowed. Forgiveness doesn't always sound like, "I forgive you." Sometimes it sounds like silence. And for me, that was enough. If you felt that, if you've ever turned your pain into power, tap heart, hit subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge is peace.